According to the law of the Rebbe, to make a סיום every day from Rosh Chodesh Mנחם until 15 B'Av, we have the honor today to have a Choshev in German, Harav, HaDoktor, Reb Meir, Zאקלאס, Meir, Zאקלאס will make a סיום, and I want to use this opportunity to give him a brocha b'shem kol hamisparlim everybody on all his patients. Und hoben shlas brocha v'atzlocha regel yom holedet shelei le'erech yom v'shonim tevis Harav Zאקלאס, doctor, bevakasha.
Okay.
And he's going to make a sim on Masechet Tmura. The Rav the Rebbe also to give tzedakah v'tzibur. Everybody gives tzedakah v'tzibur.
Okay, the last Mishnah in Masechet Tmura goes like this. It says, these are things that have to be buried. Kodshim shefilu yakovru, v'yipilu shayu tikover, v'shor hanisko, v'egel arufa, v'tzipore mitzera, v'seir nozir, v'peter chamor, v'basar b'cholov, v'chulun shenishchatu b'azara. Okay, so the first parts was things that happened, that they were aborted fetuses of animals, and we talked about an animal that had to be stoned, or we talked about basar b'cholov. So those are the things that the Mishnah starts off saying, these are things that have to be buried. And then the Mishnah continues further on and says, Ve'elu heinan nisrafim, these are things that have to be burnt. Chometz b'pesach yisaref, truma tmeya, v'horla, klei hakerem, these things have to be burnt. So the Mishnah then says, asks the question, Kol nikbam lo yisrafu, things that have to be buried shouldn't be burnt. V'chol hanisrafim lo yikovru, and things that have to be burned shouldn't be buried. So the Gemara continues later on and asks, Kol hanikbarim lo yisrafu, things that have to be buried, they shouldn't be burnt. My timer, what's the reason? So the answer is Mishum Nikbarim Ephraim Aser, because things that are buried, their ash from their burial is Aser, V'nisrafim Ephron Mutter. But things that are burnt, what's the leftover from the burning of the ashes? So the ashes, L'chura, would be Mutter. But then the question is the Gemara asks, Nisrim the Hektish, Ephron Mutter, is it true? What about Nisrafim of Hektish that we talked about at the beginning? If it's Hektish, how could it be Mutter? Tanya, and we learned, Kol HaNisrafim Ephron Mutter, all things that are burnt, Ephron is Mutter, Chutz, Me'efer Asherah, the ashes of the Asherah tree, which is Avodah Zarah, the Efer the Hektish li'olam Aser, and the Efer of Hektish is always Aser. So later on, towards the last two lines of the Masechta, Reb Shmaya Omer, he qualifies this, and he says, Ki Tanya Hamasnisa, when did we learn this brisa? Only b'Trumas Hadeshen. When we're talking about what Hektish, we're talking about Trumas Hadeshen. Tanya, that it's always Aser. Why? The Tanya, because there's a pasuk says V'samay benachas. What's V'samay benachas? It means that this Haramas Hadeshen you put on the side of the Mizbech, and we'll talk more about it later. V'samay kuloi, all of it is put on the side. V'samay shaloi yafazer. Now, first of all, it's V'samay benachas. You put it down gently. V'samay kuloi, all of it. V'samay shaloi yafazer, and you put it down so it shouldn't be scattered. So when it's in a specific place, in the last Rashi says, V'samay etzon mizbech v'samay kuloi, v'kivin deton geniza. Since this requires geniza, a repository, it's a place that you put it special, aser b'hano. That's the aser b'hano. The Rebbe makes a siyum on Masechtas Tmura, and it was Chaf of Tafshin Mem Aleph. So after completing the Gemara, like we just did, the Rebbe brings the opinion of the Rambam, and the Rambam says, Kol HaNisrafim Shel Hektish, anything that has to be burnt from Hektish, Ephron is Mutter, Chutz, three things. Deshen Mizbeach HaChitzin, right, the outer Mizbeach. V'deshen HaMizbeach HaPnimi, the inner Mizbeach in the Hechel. and Mideshen HaMenorah. Those three things are Aser. Everything else is Mutter. Then the Rebbe brings the Ravid, and the Ravid says, no, it says, when it says Chutz Mideshen HaMizbeach HaChitzin, he's specifically referring to Haramas HaDeshen HaMizbeach, and it's based on the words in the Pasuk, it's Beherim Es HaDeshem, and then later it says, V'somo Eitzel HaMizbeach. And there he's talking about specifically the Terumas Hadeshen, that's the first thing that happens during the day of the Avodah. Then the Rebbe brings support for the Rambam in a Kesef Mishnah, and he says that Dishon Mizbeach HaChitzin is Aser Ba'ano. He brings that from the Kesef Mishnah. But then the Rebbe asked, the question still remains, how does the Rambam know that Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi and the Dishon HaMenorah is also Aser? So the Rebbe says, simple, it's a Kal V'chomer. Madoch Dishon Mizbeach HaChitzin, which is outside in the Hazorah. And it's Aser, then Kol Shkein in the Heichal, where you have the Mizbeach HaPnimi, and by extension you have the Menorah. So that is even more, this is more Kedusha, because it's in the Heichal. It's also, to me anyway, it seems it's also close to Meirazite. Close to Meirazite is closer to the Kodesh Kodeshim. And the Menorah actually is even closer than the Mizbeach HaPnimi. So for those obvious reasons, the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi and the Dishon Menorah are both Aser according to the Rambam. Then the Rebbe says, how can we apply this to Avodah? And the Rebbe says there are two types of Avodas that we all know about. There's B'chol Derechecho De'ehu, which seems to be more or less the Avodah of a tzaddik, where everything he does, every thought, every action is for Hashem. And then the second kind of Avodah they call Masechel L'Shem Shemayim, that we do things that are rishus, but in the end, of course, it's all L'Shem Shemayim. So the Rebbe hints, it's not 100% clear, and I'm willing to be challenged a little later. The Rebbe hints that there's a connection between Bechol Derechecho De'ehu and Trumas Hadeshen. What's the connection? So first we have to go through the steps of Trumas Hadeshen, right? So there are two things. I guess the important thing is to let's just read the pasuk, and we'll see there's two parts. There it says V'lovash hakoyin midei vad u'michnas vad yobash al b'sareh v'heri mesadeshen asher teichol reish tasarelo al mizbeach v'somo etzel al mizbeach. So that was the first thing, the Trumas Hadeshen. He went up in the Mizbeach in his special clothing, and he put it where? On the side of the Mizbeach. And then the next part seems like a separate avodah, although there's others that argue differently. It says, he puts on different. And he takes deshen el mechutz lamachane, el mokim toyer. So that seems like this second kind of avodah. So it seems like it's divided into two. There's Trumas Hadeshen and the Haitzoas Hadeshen. So first we're going to talk about the steps in Trumas Hadeshen and see how it fits the Bechol Derechel De'ehu. So the first thing that happened to us is that Alas HaShachar, there was a Geirul. The Geirul is doch a Helik Ezach. So that the first thing at Alas HaShachar, all the Kohanim used to line up, and there was one Kohen that was chosen by Geirul. What was the second inyan that's important? The second inyan that's important is that this avodah of Trumas Hadeshen was the first avodah of the day. What's so special, the first avodah of the day? That means there's a hemshech, there's a continuation. Yesterday's karbonos are now going to be connected to today's karbonos, because the first avodah is Trumas Hadeshen. What's another thing that was so special about Trumas Hadeshen is that, according to Rashi, Trumas Hadeshen happened every single day of the year. What else was special? They put on the big day kahuna was specified, right? It's midei vad that we said the first part of the pasuk. It was a little different than their regular big day kahuna, true, but it was a level of kedusha that wasn't found, as we're going to discuss soon, on Haitzoas Hadeshen. They had to change, as we mentioned in the pasuk. What was another thing special about Trumas Hadeshen? that after the koimitz that was taken, so they took a handful, but the koimitz that was taken had to be from the center of the Mizbeach. Why the center of the Mizbeach? Because in the center of the Mizbeach, you knew that the korbanos were completely burnt. On the edges, on the outsides, there was wood from the day before, there may have been other body parts, etc., etc. So what you were looking for is that pure deshen, if you want to call it pure deshen, from the day before. That's again, a special kite. Then they had to do haroma itself. They had to lift up, they had a mole machta, they took a special silver shovel, and they lifted up the deshen. That koimitz wasn't a lot, but it was a special avodah, and it was all part of the mitzvah. Then finally, with the deshen was taken down from the mizbeach. As he went down the keves, he made a 180-degree turn going north. He went 10 ames and deposited the trumas hadeshen next to the mizbeach. And of course, the real mess that took place was that when he deposited it there, eventually it was swallowed up in the earth. Now, you would think that when we talk about truma, when it comes to truma that you give to that it's given to a kohen, when you talk about hafaras shachala, you always take the good from the rest, and the rest becomes chulin. Here, what you're doing, you were taking ashes. Ashes were already burnt from the korbanos of before. You're taking ashes and you're calling that truma. How could you call it truma? So one of the answers is this exact nest that happened when it got swallowed into the ground. It became part of Eretz Yisrael. That it was a bracha to the entire land of Eretz Yisrael. So it was, even though it was ash, it was actually a truma. It was something very, very special. And what was also special is that the entire avodah of Trumas Hadeshen was done completely in the Beis HaMikdash. Everything was done in the Beis HaMikdash, as opposed to what we're going to see now, where Haitzos Hadeshen was a little different. So, now let's go through the steps. I know it's too long. Let's go through the steps of Haitzos Hadeshen. And why? Let's see if we can fit that into Kol Ma'asecha L'Shem Shemayim. Sure, the end was, of course, it's an avodah too. But let's look at the maises that we had to go through for Haitzos Hadeshen. Okay, so the first thing was Haitzos Hadeshen could be performed by any kohen. There was no goy rule, so any kohen that wanted to do it, and it's a bisla shvera arbit. There you had to put on, again, as we mentioned, a set of clothing, and you had to take a certain measure and take it out. And it was a major production, a major job. So any kohen could do it. That's number one. Then, as we mentioned, it's begadim acherin. It wasn't like this. They had to change the foshat as begadav. He had to change his clothes, even from the herim hadeshem. He had to change it when it comes to haitzos hadeshen. So it was already on a lower level. The next thing is there was also no specific time period. Whereas before we said that every day, trumas hadeshen had to be taken out. When it comes to haitzos hadeshen, when did it have to be taken out? When it was already very full, it was getting very messy. So that's when they had to take it out. Although there's an interesting word that says that in Yontif they dafkin didn't take out the deshen. Why? Because they wanted to show everybody the piles and piles and piles of korbanos that Yidden brought for Yontif. So they dafkin left it there. Yontif, there should be a very, very big pile. What was the next step that happened? Was that the quantity was never established. When was it clean? It was clean when there was a need to clean it for covered abayis. They knew that the fire would burn better if you cleaned away the ashes, but there was no specific quantity, like we mentioned about the koimitz, that was specific for Romas Hadeshen. The other thing is that the ashes, that the deshen of the Haitzos Hadeshen, they dafka did the opposite. So they used to, instead of taking from the middle, they took from the sides, which included the wood and the bones, and they made a pile that was called a tapuach. The tapuach in the center, and then when it became a very large tapuach, that's when they took it out. And where did they take it? They took it to a clean place, Markham Torah. But again, it wasn't this. There's no nest that was connected with the taking out. It had to be just taken out. And where was it taken out to? Had to be outside Yerushalayim, which means outside the Beis Hamikdash, which means that part of this avodah was taking place outside of Yerushalayim. So the kohen that performed it obviously got soiled, and that's why he had to wear a special beged, and they had to schlep it all the way outside. So what's the conclusion? The conclusion is that Haitzos Adeshin, which we just mentioned, it says was a tedious and time-consuming. This is in a Mishnah in Tamid. But nevertheless, it says that the kohanim were never lax when it came to removal of the deshin. So too, with us, every mitzvah and every hachana to a mitzvah should be so precious in our eyes that it will bring us a step closer to Yor Shleimu B'Karev Mamash. Oh yeah, well I didn't say the Hadron also. Hadron Aloch Yesh B'Kodshim Mizbech V'Salakal Mesechtes Tmura. Skada v'skada shmei rabba v'yom rochadus v'yam achutz yasu konem konem mishiche chayech l'mechan l'chayit l'chav yisrael b'agol zman kariv v'romein yesh shmei rabba v'archomo v'yamai yisbarach v'shtavo v'sferis v'misnasi v'sador v'srei v'salo shmei shabrichu v'yom mikol b'chos v'shiroz b'chos nechamos namiram yomo v'romein Yisrael b'odem al-tamidem al-kol tamid yesem edem al-kol mondoskim b'raisim v'asim hodi b'yocho asar v'asar Eloy nechon shlomo rabba chine v'chisim rachmei v'chayna richne v'zoni v'ich v'konem konem v'shmai v'romein Yesh shlomo rabba v'shmai v'chayim temen v'gosro v'romein Eis shalom v'romein v'yas shalom v'romein v'yisrael v'romein